WJR.
So to meet this demand growth reliably, we're going to need substantial increases in the supplies of all forms of energy. A lot of people today want to pick winners and losers. We want this energy because it's clean. We don't want this energy because we perceive it's dirty. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need as many sources of energy as we can for the future. Let's take a look at current and future demand by the various energy sources. Today, fossil fuels comprise 80% of global energy usage. Oil and gas are 60%, coal is 20%, and all other forms of energy comprise the remaining 20%. So as you and I would hope and expect, there will need to be much more dramatic growth in non-fossil fuel energy sources in the future than what we've seen in the past. Sources such as nuclear power, renewable fuels, biofuels, hydro, geothermal, electric power, wind, solar. These are all going to be important, critical parts of the equation and of the solution. Yet, the fastest growing major energy sources are going to be natural gas and coal globally because of rising demand for electricity. Demand for coal is being largely driven by growth in the developing countries, particularly in Asia Pacific. China, for example, starts up a new coal-fired power plant every 10 days. And let me assure you, it is not employing clean coal technology. The bottom line is that by 2030, despite all the rhetoric to the contrary, the International Energy Agency projects that fossil fuels will still comprise about 80% of the world's energy usage. So against this backdrop, within this context, the real question is, how does the U.S. and the world as a whole secure access to sufficient quantities of reliable, affordable energy, and do so, very importantly, while safeguarding the environment? My comments today are going to focus on the U.S., but I want to start with the key role that Michigan will play. I applaud Governor Granholm's initiative that searches for a comprehensive means to put energy to work to build competitiveness in Michigan. Marathon has had more than 75 years of experience in this state, from the Albion Scipio field to the Prairie du Chien play to the age of ethanol. We continue to see a promising future for Michigan energy, ranging from new fuels to potential new projects at our Detroit refinery. And speaking of the refinery, I want to acknowledge and thank the local leaders here, including the City Council, the City Administration, state officials and agencies, business leaders, unions, and many others who supported the tax abatement incentives for the refinery upgrade expansion. This has been a true partnership, and we are deeply appreciative for your efforts. And that extends to the Michigan congressional delegation. We've worked closely with Congresswoman Kilpatrick. And I also want to credit Congressman John Dingell, who spoke here in May. He's been a key player in the climate discussion from the very beginning and has put forth, I think, some meaningful proposals on climate change legislation and questioned the status quo and engaging in the right kinds of questions. But energy security is not going to be easy for you, for me, for Michigan, for our nation as a whole. If our nation is to achieve energy security, and very importantly, as I said before, maintain economic competitiveness and not let our standard of living slip, we can no longer tolerate misleading and often inaccurate rhetoric and quick fixes. We need a well-reasoned, fact-based, comprehensive energy strategy that is fully integrated. This is extremely important. Fully integrated and consistent with a climate change plan and U.S. foreign policy. We have tended to treat these three elements as separate silos, each going about their own solutions without understanding the relationships and interdependencies between them. So what I want to do today is briefly outline what I believe are the three major components of this strategy and what they should be, along with some examples of what my industry and my company is doing. First, the cheapest and most plentiful form of new energy is actually energy efficiency and conservation. Reasonable progress has been made in the past. In fact, if you look back, the U.S. economy has doubled since the 1970s, while our energy use has only increased about 25%. But frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we can do much more. And to give you a sense of the potential impact, a 6% reduction in our energy use would effectively reduce U.S. crude oil imports by a third. So I think efforts to increase energy efficiency should focus on a few key areas. One that certainly this community is well aware of is the need to continue to improve vehicle-fueled economy. I know the auto industry overall supports increased efficiency, but what's needed aren't legislative mandates, but technologically feasible standards, sufficient lead times, and a level playing field amongst competitors. And frankly, as I was discussing at the table up here, this is an area where in the past, the U.S. and auto industries have worked in opposition to one another. We can do much more working together to the right kinds of fact-based, scientific-based, engineering-based solutions. We also have to reduce energy consumption in the residential and commercial sectors, and doing that through more aggressive building codes and appliance standards. And lastly, we need to increase the efficiency of our industrial sector. And to this latter point, my industry has been taking action. 5 years ago, America's oil and gas companies made a pledge to the U.S. government that we'd improve energy efficiency in our refineries by 10% over 10 years. Because energy accounts for more than half our operating costs, this is something we've always focused on. But I'm pleased to report that the industry is on track to meet that goal of improved efficiency. And for our part at Marathon, we estimate that over the last 4 years, our refineries have improved efficiency by 4.5%. And in recognition of what we've done, the Environmental Protection Agency gave its Energy Star Award for energy efficiency to Marathon's refineries in Texas, Ohio, Minnesota, and Louisiana, and I'm certain that our Detroit refinery is working on achieving that same status. The second key component of an energy security strategy, in my opinion, is diversity of supplies. Diversity comes in two forms: geographic diversity in terms of where we source our oil and gas from, and the second part is diversity in terms of the alternative forms of energy that we use. A couple of points as to oil and natural gas. First, as I indicated before, oil and gas will remain the dominant source of energy for a very long period of time, due in large part to significant cost and infrastructure advantages. Second, despite what peak oil theorists may say, there is more than ample oil and gas resource in the world to meet this demand. Right here in North America, the Canadian oil sands hold great resource potential for the future. In the Athabasca region of northern Alberta, there is an estimated 175 billion barrels of recoverable crude bitumen, or heavy oil, which amounts to 3/4 of North American petroleum reserves. It's in this region that Marathon has recently made an almost $7 billion acquisition of interest in the Athabasca Oil Sands Project, where we will mine this heavy oil and ultimately transport it and link it to our U.S. refineries. And in fact, as Michael mentioned before, we are now considering certainly the project where we would bring that heavy oil to our Detroit refinery and let it be a destination for a very, very long-term supply of Canadian heavy oil. Putting together long-term solutions to economically produce the multi-billion barrel long-life reserves of the Canadian oil sands is how Marathon is going to help meet American energy demand. But nonetheless, as we look around the globe, access to other oil and gas resources by U.S. companies is becoming increasingly difficult and costly due to increased competition from foreign companies. There is an intense wave of nationalism by those countries that control about 80% of the world's oil and gas reserves. They're becoming much more less reliant on U.S. companies and U.S. technology and U.S. investment. And you've no doubt seen recently what's happened to several U.S. companies that were in essence ushered out of Venezuela.